Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Dwellings of Eldervale, designed by Luke Laurie and put out by Breaking Games. This is a game that was on Kickstarter with a variety of different options in terms of pledge levels, different options you can get, down to a base core game, all the way up to deluxeified, super deluxeified, extra monsters, meeples, sound bases, all the extra goodies. This is a game that is absolutely gorgeous in the production. It's going to be a game that's combining aspects of Eurogames with aspects of Ameritrash games. The core game mechanic really just comes down to the idea that it's worker placement. You take a worker, you put it on the map, you activate that location, either getting some resources that will go into your personal tray and or activating some of the rune locations for various special abilities. Once you're done placing workers, or even before you're done if you so choose, you can instead choose to regroup them all. This is an action we've seen before in some other games, also from other games from Luke Laurie himself, in which you'll pull back all your workers, activating various locations on cards that you have acquired throughout the course of the game, to instead of taking simple one shot at a time, one step at a time turns, you'll instead get all at once, getting a powerful singular action where you can withdraw anyone. But that's only going to be true for your troops that haven't died in the underworld. Anyone who has actually died in battle throughout the course of the game will instead make their way to the underworld, where you will get a sword for that, courage, revenge, have at it or whatnot, but at the same time you will not be able to withdraw them to take actions. And that is basically the core of the game. Everything else is around that core mechanism of place out a worker, take an action, and then there will be a ton of differences that mix this things up. You're going to have a set of cards that are going to be different game to game. You see, there are 8 elemental tracks. I don't know if they're elemental, but there are 8 different tracks, power tracks, that provide a different flavor or aspect to the game. In every game, you're going to play with the number of players plus 2. So a 3-player game would have 5 of those 8 elements in play, which means you can shift up which combinations enter your game and which of them affect the game in different ways, because each of these tracks does have a slightly different flavor. The tracks will define which locations make up the board. They will define which factions are available for people to choose from, because there are 8 different factions, each with 2 sides, which means 2 different potential ability combinations for each different faction. It's going to affect the various cards that are in the game, because the cards are a huge part of the game. Each of these elements or whatnot will have a full deck of cards that has different abilities, different things that will mix up the game and the different types of actions you can do, because getting those cards will be a combination of endgame points, recurring ongoing abilities, or many of them are going to be those cards that you place down in your tableau to activate when you pull back your workers. And finally, it's going to affect the monsters in the game. You have these creatures of Eldervale that will be slowly but surely entering the board and making your placements very difficult, because when you place a worker down a spot, it's going to cause all adjacent monsters to actually shift in there. Technically, if there's more than one, you pick and choose, but it's going to mean you have to be very conscious of the board state, of where the monsters are and whether you can survive those battles or whether you even care. Because while you can put out your guy no matter what you do, and you'll get the action no matter what you do, the monster will then attack you, and you may or may not actually survive that battle, which, if you kill the monster, it's a good thing. If you die, you get a dagger, a sword, or whatnot. So all these things are all combined to what's going on there. The combat in this game is going to be a pretty simple mechanism where you have to place down your workers when it triggers a combat by putting your worker in the same spot as another person, or when a monster moves into it. You're going to roll a varying number of dice from your board, up to 6 dice each player, and you'll roll them equal to the number of contributors you have to the battle. So your different units will contribute variable amounts of dice. Each sword you contribute will contribute another dice, which effectively means that when your people die, they are also giving you dice to be stronger the next battle, and then cards and abilities will also affect the number of dice you roll. From there, you roll them and you basically compare highest number. This is a game where a single 6 will beat out a person having 5 5s. Now, don't worry, that statistically does not happen that often, but it has a combat-focused mechanic where winner takes all the other players, they all go to the underworld and die. Monsters are removed from the game, likely never to be seen again, but there are cards that will bring them back. And then from there, once you're done with this whole engine over here, you'll slowly be adding other tiles to the board as you go. You'll slowly be buying more cards, building up your engine. You'll be acquiring more spells, putting out your more guys, earning more of your workers, because you can buy your dragon worker, you can buy your warrior worker, or your mage worker or whatnot. So you're slowly but surely building up what you can do in this game. And from there, you will proceed to endgame scoring. Endgame scoring in this game is ultimately going to be all based around how well you did in advancing up those elemental pathways. Because if you can be dominant in 2 or 3 different pathways, that's going to cascade down to different things you'll score for. You'll score for being high on a pathway. You'll score for being high on the pathway matching your original starting faction. You'll score for being high on pathways equal to the cards you have, as well as high on pathways equal to the dwellings you're going to build in these locations. One thing I have not touched upon is the idea that at certain points you can build locations, dwellings in these spots that will give you battle bonuses. It will advance you up the elemental track, and it will give you in-game points when you do so. Additionally, it'll give you end-game points at the end of the game as well. But you do put that adorable little hat on top of a meeple, meaning you lose one of your workers in the process. And so that endgame scoring is going to magnify any particular element you did well in. You will magnify it by every single thing that happened in the game. This is a game where it's very easy to get so lost in doing all the stuff that you forget that scoring is a big part of the game. This is our very first game of Dwelling of Eldervale. It basically ended up with realizing that we were down to, 2 tiles left, and we'd only built like 1 or 2 dwellings each, and we hadn't come close to maximizing our scoring potential. But we still enjoyed that game and had a lot of fun with the aspects of what we were doing, and we came back next game stronger. And from there we can go into there's so many different things about this game that are well done. From the aspect of the card comboing, this game has card comboing left, right, and center. Every single one of those factions, of those elements, is going to provide its own unique deck and your own unique feel to the way you can acquire different cards. This card's, every time I complete a quest, I gain 2 points. This one lets me put a guy down there to advance up the battle track, which can be incredibly useful. There are so many different cards that all provide their own feel to the game, and then you combine those with the fact that, like I said, a 3-player game is going to have 5 of these different elements available every single game, and then acquiring that card with that card, attaching an aura to that card to activate it every single round. The card comboing in this game, the way you can interlace all these cards and different abilities and build up your own unique special tableau is amazingly fun. The race powers in this game are also a ton of fun. Each race comes with 2 different sides, and each side comes with 2 different powers for how they are going to augment the basic actions of those workers. Because like I said already, your wizard, your mage, your warrior, and your basic workers, of which you have 6, all have their own unique way of how they do things. Workers can be built on, warriors can enter battle more easily, mages can go anywhere, and then dragons are strong, and they can go a little further than your typical workers. But then, to mix that up, you'll have your faction board, which has 2 different sides that each give different abilities to how your workers or your mages will do different things. So perhaps my blinding light, my wizard here has blinding light, and whenever it goes somewhere next to a monster, I can choose to not have the monster enter the board. The underworld will have this aspect that whenever your warrior enters the underworld, you can permanently increase his strength instead of taking a single sword. So you can have a warrior that's rolling 5 dice in and of himself, which is, well, it's a little intimidating to be honest. These swarms, from the rattling swarms, every time your worker joins a battle, you get an additional sword. Every one of these abilities will have a slight variation that shifts the way that faction plays. It's not a lot, but it is a lot at the same time, and I love race powers. I love card comboing, I love race powers, and then spells. You have an entire deck full of different spells, anything from spells you can cast to modify how things go. Maybe this round when I pull everyone back from the underworld, I can actually use them to activate all my cards at the same time. Maybe I cause some sort of battle in the underworld and move one of my workers there. Maybe I augment a battle with 2 extra dice casting a fireball. There's going to be quests that can give you rewards if you achieve a certain set of criteria, and then finally there are going to be endgame cards that are prophecies that at the end of the game, you will get extra additional points for certain criteria that you fulfilled. And so those spells, again, that's another aspect to mixing up the game state. The monster variability, there are 16, well, it depends what level you got this game at, but there are between 8 and 16 different monsters in this game. Monsters that, again, are going to shift up how you have to deal with this mess. Sure, this monster is, a little threatening there, but he's actually fairly tame. You can choose not to fight battles with him, which means you can choose, when you have 2 monsters about to enter the realm you just placed in, you can choose to have this guy go in instead, which makes your life a lot easier, because you don't have to have a battle. There are other monsters that you'll die whether you win or lose, or monsters that will stop other creatures from entering that battle and joining that battle, and it changes the whole game state. So every single one of these 16 monsters provides something different to the table in terms of the variability it adds to the game. And the monsters, I love how they force you to choose and think about how you're going to place your workers, about what you want to do, where you want to do it. Perhaps I draw a monster this way first, sacrificing my worker to the underworld. But then now I can go here next turn because the monster's no longer adjacent. The monsters, even though they are just 1 or 2 monsters on a giant map full of tiles, they significantly shift up the way you have to think about the game, the way you have to think about you're ultimately likely going to lose most of your battles against the monsters in the early game if you're, well, no matter what you do, because they're rolling a lot more dice. Sure, you can get lucky, but don't count on it. It's not likely to happen. And so the monsters change the way the game is played up every single time. I love the 2-way worker placement of both putting out your workers to get what you want and then pulling them all back in to get a strong turn. Like I said already, this is something we've seen before in games, but when done well, it can be very rewarding to have that strong turn where you pull a bunch of things back and suddenly you feel like you doubled up everything you just did for the last 3 turns. And then the modular expansions this game brings to the table that has a bunch of stuff in it, from mercenaries to the ice dragon to different aspects of the Iron Golem, I think it is, that they give you different aspects that will mix up the way you play the game, that will mix up small different shifts. Like the mercenaries are these creatures you can hire, and you can add them to your game, and you can hire temporarily with gold or permanently with these gems that are particularly hard to get your hands on. And so that's another way to shift up the game, adding increasingly more levels of modularity to what already is an incredibly modular experience. And there's a high level of strategy around even the smallest things, which I appreciate. Putting down a person every single turn to get a small resource bonus can sometimes feel, on a surface of it, it feels, well, not that rewarding. Okay, great, I got a hammer or a tool or what have you. It's not that important, but it is. They all add up to trying to figure out how and when you're going to be building next. Are you acquiring more cards to build up your engine? Are you building another dwelling to get a bit more of a foothold in battles on the board, as well as scoring a ton of points? Those dwellings, both in-game and end-game points, are going to be significant. Knowing when to place, where to place, how to take into account your enemy's placement and where they're going to want to go next, how to prevent them from being able to go to spots on the board because there are these rules about when they can place to a new spot, when they can trigger a battle versus when they can't. All of those things combined to have even the smallest actions in this game have a lot more meaning than you might initially think. And yet, with all that, there are also things about dwellings that I don't recommend or don't personally enjoy myself as well. And even though, to begin with, even though I preached about the monster variability because they are variable, I would say a good half the monsters, if not more, didn't feel that variable. And you see, part of that's going to be because these monsters have an aspect to them that involves when you dominate a monster, when you can control a monster, it will shift up the way the monster behaves. And that's very, very cool. Except in all the games I've played, we've only dominated 2 monsters the entire time. We haven't seen such a high frequency of the cards that dominate monsters that half the monster's abilities only really come into play if you dominate them, which for us hasn't happened that frequently. And then from the other half, I would say a few of them, just their spells or their abilities didn't really matter. You have one particular monster where you can't cast a fireball in it in combat, which matters, but it matters to such a small, specific situation that I would say from all the monsters that there are, 3, maybe 4 of them really felt like they actually changed the way I had to approach them. And the rest of them were just there, and most of the time, unless you were going to dominate it, did not have any specific shift. And so I feel there was a lot more potential these monsters could have had in the way they mixed up the game, and yet instead they still managed to have decent chunks of text that you're still going to have to read and comprehend, even though it may never really enter the game state at all. The combat, and this is going to be a big one for me, the combat in this game does not feel satisfying. Now, I don't have a problem with the dice rolling. I do not. I'll get to that in the what I can see others not liking section of this review, but it just doesn't feel satisfying. I don't care about the fact that one time someone might roll a little heavier and be at odds or whatever, but not once in this game when I had a combat and rolled dice and won did I feel like, ooh, that really mattered. That was so momentous. And it does matter, to be very clear. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. It does matter, but contrasted with other games in the genre I like Blood Rage, like Innis, Cyclades, Kemet, something about the combat in this game felt very abstracted, very pulled back from me actually caring about what was about to happen and the consequences therein. I can't put a specific finger on it because from a pure stance of whether it affects the game, it 100% affects the game. But I would say it didn't feel like combat so much as just another mechanic in this game. The card comboing, and again, this is another big one for me, the card comboing, as satisfying as it can be, because of the scoring mechanism of the game, I often felt so at odds with what I wanted to do to build my ideal engine versus what I had to do to make sense in the scoring. And that's because of the fact that in this game, you are most strongly incentivized. You only have a few opportunities to really buy cards in the game. Someone who walks away with 7 or 8 cards, that's a lot of cards in this game already. Most players will be getting less than that. And so getting these cards and being able to score for these cards is so important that you often want to get the cards that you're going to score the most points for based on how well you're doing in the various masteries, because you can score between 0 points or 5 points per card. And so getting a better engine of cards that work together to build up a good system might sound rewarding, but unless it's going to overcome the aspect of getting the cards that are in the masteries that you're doing well in, more often than not, the cards that are more boring in what they do but higher in what they score have proven to be the better choice in this game. And so the promise of the card comboing is so strong. I love cards and abilities and powers in games. And yet, after the first few plays where I didn't do as well but had a lot more fun, I felt like I had to shift towards doing better and having less fun in the card comboing the game gives me, which I don't like when a game forces me to choose between what is fun to do versus what is ideal to do to win the game. And then lastly, there's a little bit too much tedious legwork in this game for me compared to the high moments I got out of. Sure, pulling back 6 or 7 of my workers at once and cascading all my cards and getting their abilities is very rewarding. But along the way, even though it matters, again, so much of this is in common, so much of this stuff does not go down to the strategy of the game. The strategy of the game, I think, is well up there. But so many times when I'd place a worker to get a single thing, even though it does matter, it feels tedious and a little bit repetitive going through that cycle a few times before you have those moments, before you have that card you're able to buy, the 2 cards you're able to buy, before you advance on 2 tracks, before you build a dwelling, before you pull people back. This game does have high moments where you feel like you've just crossed a bit of a threshold and you have a better engine and a more rewarding gameplay going on. But in between those moments, you have a lot of place a guy, take 2 resources, place a guy, take a resource, rinse and repeat. Again, it does matter. I'm not in any way trying to diminish the fact that it does matter. It just doesn't feel that rewarding. As far as what I can see others not liking, the luck of the dice in battles is going to be the biggest one, which, like I said, for me already, it didn't really matter. There's enough dice rolling and enough battles that I think it averages out. Sure, there will be that time where someone rolls 2 dice to your 6 and they win the battle, and that will feel a bit frustrating. But if you're playing the game enough, it will average out for the most part. And there are various mitigations, from the daggers you throw to abilities you have. There are things you can do to prevent that from being, well, that common or that frequent an occurrence. Is it something that others might mind? Yes, it's for sure. I mean, at the end of the day, someone rolling a single die can, and in our games has won against someone rolling 6 dice. That can happen. It is frustrating. It's just not that much of an issue for me because it was infrequent in when and how often it happened. And then secondly, the more strategic this game gets, the less you can get done based on our plays. And what I mean by that is the first few plays of the game, we were able to get more done because we didn't know enough about the engine at play here that we weren't getting in each other's faces as much either. As soon as you realize how impactful certain things are, as soon as you realize how important it is to not let Sarah get that extra dwelling done because then she'll be able to score an extra 3 cards at the end of the game. And so you start doing everything you can to get in her way, to block her, to make sure that she cannot possibly build a dwelling before the end game happens. Things like that in this game happen frequently. The more you see how everything can matter, the more you will get in each other's ways to stop those things from matter, and the more that will prevent you from feeling like you had a lot of powerful turns. Our first few games of dwellings, we were able to consistently pull back a lot of people, get a lot of things done, and have rewarding moments. But the more we played this game, the more we found that we would try to get in each other's way. We would try to activate a few more battles, pull in a few more monsters, because we realized how strong a turn someone was going to have, and we realized we had to get in their way. Which, while strategic, is also potentially something that might be a little frustrating for you. As far as my final thoughts on Dwellings of Eldervale, this is one that I was very torn on. On the surface, I should love this game. Everything here is right on my alley. It's a hybrid game, combining ameritrash, combining Euro aspects. I love that genre. It has powers and abilities left, right, and center, from your own individual faction boards and the way those mix up, and still, every single time I play this game, it is so much fun to pull and utilize your own faction. From the card comboing, from the spells, it has every single thing that I should like. But in practice, I have had one great game of Dwellings of Eldervale, one game that was really frustrating in how long and drawn out it was, and the rest were good. Solid games, to be sure, but not pulling that level of love that I have for games in this genre. Despite the strategy on every aspect of the gameplay, it often felt like there was a little bit too much legwork to get to the fun stuff about this game. And the fun stuff, some of the fun stuff tends to be a bit more anticlimactic than I would like I covered already. The combat doesn't feel that rewarding. Buying cards, which should be more fun, very often I felt forced to choose the card that was better for my score than the card that was more fun for the combo I was trying to build. And even when you do get cards you want to use, more often than not, you don't use them as often as I would like in the game. You might get 2 or 3 cards that work together, and then use them twice before the game actually ends. I often felt that Dwellings was a little bit too ameritrash for a good Euro game like Brass or Food Chain Magnet or whatnot, and a little bit too Euro for a good hybrid game, not delivering that moment of controlling people on the board, the same feeling I get out of Blood Rage or whatnot. All this said, I'm not keeping Dwellings of Eldervale for myself. I'm not. But I do recommend it if you like this genre. Everything about this game I should like. Some minor aspects here and there are contributing to me just not feeling the need or the desire to pull it out again in contrast with other games I have, and yet I still feel wrong. On the surface, something about this game feels like I should continue to play it, like I should like it more than I do, but I've given it enough shots by now, and if it haven't changed my mind, if it hasn't improved at this point, well, there are always other games to get to the table. This has been my review of Dwellings of Eldervale, a game that I recommend, but I'm also not keeping. It's in that weird space that I have there. And that's basically it. And until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this review. I do think you should kind of check it out, but only if all the positives sound like they're something for you. As always, and until next time, have a good one.